Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Hagan, and this is Next in Sales, a next level podcast. I am so excited to introduce you guys to my special guest today. This is Cara Felleman. She is the VP of Sales at Vividly. Cara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here on this Friday morning.
Of course. Cara, I would love if you could give a little bit of background on yourself so our viewers can get to know you just a little bit better before we dive right into the questions.
Absolutely. So a little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas. I studied advertising and psychology in college at University of Georgia. Go Dogs. Quickly, right after college, moved to New York City, as many young women do. Pursued my career in startup sales. Started in a boiler room setting, 60, 70 salespeople, 100 cold calls a day, one call closes. Unbelievable experience. I learned a lot. And then I've actually now been at 4 startups since. I've always stayed in sales, whether it's been SMB or mid-market, individual contributor or leader or team role. I've done it all. And most recently, I've spent the last 5-6 years of my career building and scaling early stage startups.
That's amazing. I mean, I remember when I reached out to you originally and I just saw your growth path and I thought it was so interesting. And hearing that you were in a place where you started out and you were making 100 cold calls a day, I mean, that can be pretty intense.
That is absolutely a hustle. I look back at those times and think, wow, I can't believe I did that. But I also realized that it was a lot about the culture and the people I was surrounded with that allowed me to do that type of grunt work, to be honest. But it also gave me the work ethic to say hard work is what you need to get the foundations to be a good seller, because you have to have swings at bat. If you have swings at bat, you can refine your skill, but you can't refine your skill if you don't actually have the opportunity to talk to prospects. And so that mindset really was something that I learned in the first few years of my career. And I've taken that and I also help, coach that with people that on my team.
No, that's really amazing. So, obviously you've had a breadth of experience. You said that you've been at 4 different startups. So one of the questions that I always like to ask is, what's the most creative way that you've ever closed a deal?
Yeah. So I was thinking about that, and there's all sorts of interesting ways to close deals, but I think creative and fun and something that I was really proud of is when I was back at Resi, the sales team that I built out was a inside sales team. So we would cold call, cold email restaurants, pitch them over the phone and close them over the phone. So never did my sales team go in person to sign a deal. It wasn't that we couldn't do it. It was just, that was not our strategy. But I was living in New York at the time, and there was a restaurant that actually was on my way home from the office to my apartment. I always pass this restaurant. And it was the restaurant that I was trying to close. So I had a follow-up call with the restaurant, and she said, I'm not sure. And she was a little wishy-washy. And she said, well, why don't we touch base, 2-3 weeks out? And I said, hey, look, today's my birthday. I live very close to you. Why don't I stop by and let's talk? And she said, well, if it's your birthday, why don't you come by and have a drink? I said, well, obviously, yeah, of course. So I ended up stopping by her restaurant, having a drink at the bar. She caught me an app, and we actually just humanized the sale, right? We didn't really talk about Resi or, why she should be signing this deal. It was more so, this is who I am as a human. Tell me about yourself. And she told me about the history of the building that she was in. It was 2 blocks from my apartment in the West Village. And we ended up cheering because she signed the deal. So let's send over the DocuSign, you're right, this is the right call. And that was something I was really proud of because a birthday sale is just one for the books. But it was something that I have never built my sales strategy by doing in-person sales. I love building an inside sales team. You can hide behind a computer in the sense of anything you need to look up is a Google away. It's a search away, a LMS tool away. And this was my first time ever closing an in-person deal and just really being me and kind of putting myself out there. And I really believe that, people buy from people that they like, they aspire to be, and people that they trust. And I was able to show that she should trust me and that she should like me. And I really think that's what helped seal the deal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the biggest part about sales is being able to humanize yourself and humanize a business and humanize the pain points that people are having. Because if you can do that, then you can get to the bottom of what people really need. And when you show that you're there for what they need, then they're going to trust you.
Yep, absolutely.
So as being at a bunch of different startups, I know that you've been involved in a lot of different hiring processes. So what do you think, especially today, are the biggest pain points that hiring managers are facing when it comes to hiring for their sales organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of pain points, right? And hiring is so difficult. I've yet to find a company that just like does it perfectly. There's always going to be people that you bring in that like really were incredible interviewers and they just don't really hit the mark. But again, salespeople should be great interviewers. I think obviously diversity is really hard. It's really hard to find diverse candidates, specifically in sales in SaaS. So that's something that I constantly am thinking about. My team is thinking about companies that I advise and consult for. It's also a topic of conversation. So I'd say diversity is definitely a pain point. I would also say there are trade-offs. People, you might want someone that has experience in that vertical. You might want someone that has experience with that average ACV. You might want someone that has experience with an adjacent tool or selling to the same persona. You're not going to find the perfect candidate.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. And if it does, it's probably too good to be true. And so what are the trade-offs that you're willing to make? And I personally think, and again, still learning myself, that if you think about your team, you should say, okay, this person has sold to this persona and has the ACV that our company has. So like, check. This person hasn't sold to that persona, but they've sold the same industry. So they understand the industry and they've sold the same ACV. So maybe those two, employee A and B can actually teach each other. So there should be common themes within the team, but they shouldn't all be doing the same thing, because if they are, you're not going to have as much creativity because everyone's going to be very similar mindset. So if you take 5 people that used to work at X company and you just plop them to the next, it's not a bad idea. Right. But I actually think, depends on the stage of the business, you might actually be hurting the ability to be more creative and productive because you are not bringing in different minds to elevate the team.
Well, and it's so interesting that you bring that up because, being a sales recruiter, I have to do that all the time because no two sales organizations are ever the same. Yeah. They're selling to different customers. They're selling in different industries. They're selling a different product. And so being able to figure out, okay, well, this might work in this way for this company and this might work in a different way it can be really challenging, but also super rewarding when you find the right people for the team.
Totally. And I also think it depends on like what is the seller, right? Does the seller need a high structured environment? Does the seller thrive in a place where there are no structure? Do they need enablement? Do they need, right? Like what does the seller need to be successful? Understanding what they need is just as important as understanding what you as the hiring manager needs. Because oftentimes early stage startups, they're not going to have an enablement manager. They're not going to have a learning management system in place. They might not even have Salesforce. And if that seller is used to being set up to having every process set up for them and they just rinse and repeat, it doesn't matter if they were the top rep at Salesforce. They're not going to be most likely the top rep at this company because they are not used to that lack of structure. So I think that's another layer to think about is what stage have they worked in the past? I have yet to find a seller that comes from high structure that does like phenomenally well at like a very, very early stage. Because that's a huge shift. It's really
completely different environment.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, so when you are hiring, what is your favorite interview question to ask people? And what does the answer to that question tell you?
Yeah. So this is a question that I learned at my first company, Single Platform. One of the questions is, I'd love to understand, what would you say is your superpower?
I love
But
this question.
also, what is something that you know that you need to work on? What is that? And the reason I ask that, I actually don't really care too much about what your superpower is. I want to understand, like, honestly, like, do you understand how you relate your superpower to the job description? Are you able to connect that what you're good at should tie back to why you'd be successful in this job? Right? Do you have that
Mhm.
connection? That's what I'm looking for. Self-awareness.
Yes.
But
Yes.
what do you need to work on says more about their self-awareness and their emotional intelligence. And that is what I care about, because if they can't come up with something to work on, then they're absolutely not the right fit for my team.
Right.
Because that is just a little delusional. And look, salespeople, I love them. I am one. We have to have rose-colored glasses on because we have to be positively optimistic. There is also a realistic expectation of like, okay, let's take those glasses off. We all have something to work on. So are they emotionally aware what they need to work on? And then I asked them for an example of a time where they were given this feedback. And when was that feedback? Was that something that happened 6 years ago? Have they tried to implement it? And look,
Right.
I'm not expecting someone to come in and say, here's what I need to work on, and this is my focus. The reality is, I want to help you enhance your superpower and be mindful of your weakness, because I can't come in
Yeah.
here and like totally transform your weakness. Like my weakness, I'm a horrible speller. I am absolutely horrible at spelling. I have been my whole life. I repeated a grade. I that's who I am.
Right.
I tell that to every employer, because if they're expecting me to be the best writer and not have errors, that's not who I am. So that is my weakness. I am proud of that. I need them to know that. But my superpower is, you give me feedback once, you are very, very unlikely to have to ask me to do it again. That is my
Yeah.
superpower, and I'm proud to say that. So you can leverage my superpower, and you can try to coach me on my thing that I need to improve on, but you're not going to get a drastic change in that for me. But if I can
Right.
drastically change, how much better can you be at feedback? That can actually move the needle on performance, and that's what I'm looking at for that conversation and dialogue with the individual.
No, that's an amazing question, because not only does it tell you whether or not they have their own self-awareness, but it also gives you the opportunity to think through, okay, this is this person's weakness. Is that something that I can actually really help them with? And is their superpower something that we can leverage as a team? And is it going to help out some of my other team members who may be struggling in that area? I think
Absolutely.
that's genius.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, what, in your opinion, Cara, is the number one trait that a sales leader must possess in order to be successful? Because not everyone can be as a sales leader.
It's a great question. There's a lot of traits, and I'll be honest, like I have had quite the journey of becoming a leader, and I'm still learning, and there's a lot for me to learn.
Yeah.
I would say, to be a really successful leader, there's a lot of qualities. But the one that I really come back to, and why I think that I have been able to be successful, is I am very transparent and I'm real. I do not stand on a high horse. I am not afraid to get down and dirty. I have a pricing call with one of my sellers today. And again, I have a manager that oversees the sales team, but
Mhm.
the manager was out last week on vacation, and the seller had a really great, initial pricing call. And I helped the seller on that call. So it is best for me to continue the conversation with the prospect, to not throw another person in.
Right.
I'm absolutely happy to do that. So I think it's what makes a really great leader is really not saying, I'm up here and you're down here. It's like, we are one team. I'm humble. I'm willing to get in the weeds with you. Like, we are a team. And I think being transparent, understanding that the sales team needs to know why. As an individual contributor, I hated when the leadership wouldn't tell me why a decision was made. Why did this have to be done? Because I felt like I was a number, and that all they
Mhm.
needed from me was a number, and like that number needed to be hit. And that's how everyone made money. And I think that when you think about millennials, you think about Gen Z, that's not going to fly in the new way that you think about a modern sales team. They're going to
Right.
want to understand like, hey, we're in a macro environment. You see people getting laid off left and right. Like, what's going on? What's your read? And you can't be like, things are great. You have to be like, all right, let's be real. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's like radical candor is, I guess, what you would qualify that. But I think radical candor is probably one of the most important attributes in terms of being a successful leader.
Well, and I think that, over the last few years, there's been kind of a shift from being from the perspective of, oh, you want to make sure that you're being nice to your team, and you want them to feel loved and cared about, and you do want those things, but not at the expense of being honest with them.
Yeah, I mean, I've always taken the approach that like I'm not looking for my team to be like, I think Cara is the coolest. Like that's not my role. Like my role outside of my job is like I have incredible friends. I am an incredible friend. But my job when I'm at work is to be a great leader and to make sure everyone's set up for success. That means, are they hitting their goal? Do they feel like they're learning? And most importantly, when they leave the company that I work with them at, are they going to make more money? Are they going to get a better job? Am I helping them with that stepping stone? And so to me, I'm not, if you don't love me, that's okay. Am I giving you the skills that you need to be the better version of you? And that's actually what I care about. And so I think I'm able to have the honest, tough conversations with my leadership team and as well as, individuals in the past, because it's coming from a place of like, hey, my intentions are for you to be where you want to be, but you have to have the tough conversations. And if you're expecting these results and you're not doing this, like just being authentic and real, opposed to just sugarcoating things or making people think their reality is real, when in fact, like if you peel back the layers, they're delusional because the data doesn't match up. And I think I think it's inappropriate for a leader to not break down that barrier and be like, hey, like, I understand you think that, but here's why you're wrong. And here's how I'm seeing it. Do you see how I see it? Got it. Let's figure out how our views can be the same.
Absolutely.
And it comes from respect.
Absolutely. So kind of moving out of necessarily sales leadership, and more into like the idea of sales culture in general, what changes would you like to see in sales culture over the next 5 years?
So I've been really lucky because I've been able to work in cultures that are not toxic, because I've been able to build my cultures, right? So I think that I have a very skewed perspective of what a sales culture looks like. So just to kind of paint the picture, when I worked at Resi, my leadership team underneath me were 3 women. I had 3 women managers on my team, and the sales team was made up of 60% women. That's unheard of, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about this like bro environment, like that was never the environment that I was in. I was at dinner last night with a friend who works in tech sales, specifically medical sales. And she said, there's 3 people on the go-to-market team out of 50 that are women. And
wow,
I can't help but feel like they don't understand me, or that, if I have a doctor's appointment that I am perceived as this or that. So I do think that overall, I'd like to see, hopefully, again, it goes back to diversity hiring, more women in sales. I would like to see, I do think that there's going to be a shift in the way we think about sales development, like 100%. I think that we need to think about what is the right career trajectory for junior sellers to move into, mid-market enterprise deals. I am not necessarily convinced that it's the traditional SDR route anymore. I think that SDRs are great, and I think it depends on the vertical, and I think it depends on the ACV. But I'm also seeing social selling. How is ChatGPT affecting the way that you do your job, right? Like I'm right now, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but right now I'm working on a plugin to say, how do I leverage data in Salesforce to create content? And like, can that increase my, open rate and response rate? Because if it can, and I can do that, then like, do I need a ton of heads to send cold emails? I'm not saying that we should be replacing sales development reps. I'm saying we need to be efficient and productive, because if you go back to looking at the environment, CAC to LTV ratio, payback period, these are all really important metrics that get us back on the map of the right evaluation of a business, which gets the stock market back on track. And that's all been out of whack. So you have to peel back of like, what is the economics of a sales team look like? So culture, I think it's diversity. I think it's also learning and development. It's not just about hitting a number. I think there's all these amazing Slack channels and communities, but it's overwhelming. So I think there have to be a shift of like, what does that look like? And yeah, and I think that I'm hoping that it's less of a, we're going to have to level out, these high growth expectations with valuations. And I think slower growth at a more sustainable rate will actually result in happier sellers, which result in more productivity. Like I think there's a lot there, but I'm interested to see because things change so rapidly. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I do think that the more diversity you have on your team, whether it's different backgrounds,
different thought processes,
everything, diversity in every way, shape, and form will only help with culture as it relates to everything and anything within the company as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the last thing I'll say is I think I'd like to see more startups really invest in educating what does the sales team do across product and engineering, because I think there's a disconnect of like, what do they do? Why do they need to sell ahead of what's developed? Right? Why do they do what they do? And I don't understand that. Right. So I think there's this training and education of like, how do each department feed into each other? Because sales drives the ability to hire. But if sales doesn't do well, it impacts everyone.
Right. Absolutely. Well, okay. Last question for you, Cara. Who do you look up to in the world of sales?
Yeah. So I think that I don't think it's like one person. I would say that I have a couple amazing mentors. And I actually consume a lot of information on LinkedIn. Because I think that I like very small snippets of information, but I would say that I am a part of the GTM fund, and that is a fund with unbelievable go-to-market leaders. And that has probably been the best way for me to feel connected to some of the greatest minds in the industry. Whether it's go-to-market strategy, whether it's branding information, but I would say that, and also the people that I work with or have worked with in the past, those are the people that I lean in on. Whether it was my time at Single Platform, my time at Bitly, my time at Resi, the companies that I consult for, the network that I've created are actually who I look up to because they know me best, which means they can continue to give me feedback of like, hey, remember when you used to get frustrated about that? You just gave me the same feedback, right? And so I think that what inspires me is seeing growth. And oftentimes people are like, oh, I wish I could be like that influencer on LinkedIn. And they have so many amazing things. And they worked at Outreach and Salesforce and like the big names like Google. I actually think that those people are awesome. Like those people are not me. And so I think that I take that as a nugget. But the people that are the real life people that affect me and that I've worked with are the people that I look up to. Because I actually know them as humans and I've seen the work that they do. So I think I have a little bit of a different viewpoint on it. And I think in the world that we have influencers and people live on the internet and portray this life, it's hard to know what is real and what is not real. So I like to just try to keep my circle as realistic as possible because it's easy to say specifically as a young female leader, like, I wish that I had that exit, or I wish that I had that idea, or look how great they're doing. And like, are they? At the end of the day, you never know. But I do know people that I'm inspired by because I talk to them and I see their raw reality of life. So a little bit of a twist there, but I'm inspired by the people that I work with essentially.
That's amazing. I love that. Well, Cara, thank you so much for joining me today. Do you have any last advice that you would like to share with our viewers before we wrap up?
Yes, I'm going to throw another loop for you guys because a lot of people, this is sales focused. I think that being financially smart is extremely important. So for any salespeople that are watching, I would really recommend that you think about that commission check that you make and think about your long-term success. I saw very early on in my career that salespeople that were making great commission checks really early on in their career were literally just throwing money and spending it. And that's amazing, right? And you should absolutely celebrate those wins. Buy something for that first amazing commission check. I always recommend that so you can have something tangible that you remember, that success. First time in a new job, get something that you remember. But be financially smart. Sales is a roller coaster. You're not going to always have an amazing quarter. You could get laid off in sales. You might want to buy a house one day, or you might have to, have a rainy day fund. Do not just spend money because you are making a variable and you're successful in your job. Make sure you are putting money aside every single month because that compounds. And I really think that every seller should have to take like a financial independence class. What does it mean to have a 401k and all these things? Because we are at a position that like we are actually making money and early on, because the more successful you are, the more money you're making. And the more money you save earlier in your career, the more you're going to set up for the success, the future, because it's compounding. And no one talks about that. So if you're listening and you're making good commission, my recommendation is set up a second checking account, put a percentage of your income in this checking account that you don't see, and get that into investments. Don't let it sit in your checking account. Work with someone. I imagine someone at your company knows what they're doing with money if they've been in sales for a long time, and talk about these things, because this is so important and that is not talked about enough.
No, that's amazing advice. And I think that everyone, even if you're not in sales, if you're in recruiting, especially as well, absolutely super, super important. Cara, thank you so much for your time today. I love chatting with you. And for all of our viewers, if you guys liked what Cara and I had to say today, I would highly encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, share this with friends, family, colleagues, anyone who you feel might benefit from something that we've said today. Again, this is Next in Sales, a Next Level podcast. I'm Anna Hagen, and I will see you next week.